So, I really need people to stop pretending that the Draco wasn't universally considered one of the worst comic arcs in the history of X-Men. I was there. I saw it happen. None of you are offended now because Marvel is de-emphasizing Azazel. Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. This is MC Frodis. I love the X-Men. And of all of the X-Men, my favorite has long been Kurt Wagner, aka Nightcrawler. The sexy as hell, fuzzy blue elf has always been a fun character with a complicated story that interested me. One of the most complicated parts of Nightcrawler's story is his origin story. That origin just got a lot more complicated with the release of X-Men Origins Blue #1. There are massive spoilers for that comic in this video, so beware. But before we get into that, who exactly is Nightcrawler and what is up with his origin story? Initially created by Dave Cockrum, Nightcrawler was introduced to comics in 1975's Giant-Sized X-Men #1. He was the first of Charles Xavier's new recruits for a team of international mutants, with Nightcrawler hailing from Germany. In his introduction, Nightcrawler is rescued by Xavier from an angry mob after he accidentally killed his foster brother. Nightcrawler would be an integral member of various X-teams, often serving as leader. He had notable friendships with Wolverine, Storm, Kitty Pryde, Colossus, and romances with just so many women.
Chicks dig the Fozzie dude!
Nightcrawler was meant to be a physical representation of the prejudice against mutants. While he looked like a demon, he was a kind-hearted sweetie who was always good for a joke, and actually a devout Catholic. Nightcrawler's time in comics for the first few years was relatively uneventful, serving mostly as swashbuckling comic relief. Once Chris Claremont took over writing duties, Nightcrawler's family life and origin story would become very complicated. Complications that remain to this day, nearly 50 years later. Before we get into the recent drama, I would like to set a baseline for just how complicated Nightcrawler's family life is. Kurt dated his foster sister, the girl he was raised with, through the 70s without knowing her true identity, and when he found out, kept dating her. In fact, Kurt and Amanda have dated on and off since then, while also completely acknowledging each other as foster brother and sister. So once we get into the complications of today's topic, know that as unbelievable as it might sound, it is really just par the course for Nightcrawler. From the very beginning, Kurt was known to be an orphan. In 1981's Days of Future Past, Nightcrawler had his first encounter with Raven Darkholme, also known as the villainous shapeshifter Mystique. During a fight, Mystique ended up partially transformed between her own appearance and Nightcrawler's, and he noticed their physical similarities. Surprised by this, and her knowledge of his real name, Nightcrawler rightfully asked her, "Who are you?" To which Mystique replied, "Ask your foster mother." It would not be until 1994's Theories of Relativity that this would be revisited. Nightcrawler was confronted by human supremacist Graydon Creed, who revealed they were half-brothers through Mystique. Creed was the son of Sabretooth, while Kurt was the son of a German count. Creed revealed that Mystique had shapeshifted to her natural form during childbirth and had to flee from murderous townspeople, and Kurt was thrown over a waterfall by one of those townspeople. He survived and was adopted by Margali Sarados, which is where the weird in love with my foster sister stuff comes into play. Oh, and also this revelation means that Rogue is Nightcrawler's adopted sister. I told you, it's complicated. For almost 20 years, this was the extent of Nightcrawler's canonical origins, with some variations popping up along the way, but nothing too extreme. Eventually, Chuck Austen took over the X-Men book, and in 2003 wrote The Draco. This completely rewrote Nightcrawler's origins, revealing that while Mystique was married to a German noble named Christian Wagner, she had an affair with a mutant named Azazel. Azazel is part of a mutant subspecies known as the Nephim, which are basically mutant demons. Azazel is pretty much the Kmart version of Mephisto, and he got locked away in a demonic dimension. He could come to Earth briefly, just long enough to impregnate a bunch of women, with the hope his offspring would have enough power to bring him and his demon army forth to Earth by opening a portal by sacrificing themselves. If you think this sounds stupid, that's because it is. Chuck Austin completely missed the memo about Kurt defying expectations. Despite his appearance, he was just a normal guy. But Austin really wanted to drive home the demonness of Nightcrawler. Only a few issues before the Draco, he wrote Holy War, where Nightcrawler's 3-year arc of studying for the priesthood was dismantled in 2 issues. It was revealed he was being mind-controlled by a group that wanted to destroy the Catholic Church by faking the rapture, which isn't even a Catholic concept, using exploding communion wafers, and oh my god, fuck you, Chuck Austin. He really makes it easy to lose track of what you're saying. Needless to say, folks were not here for this period of Nightcrawler's comic existence. The comics actually stopped featuring him heavily until they just straight up killed him during the Second Coming arc. But unsurprisingly, he did get better because you can't keep a good X-Man down, and he has since become a major player in the X-Men universe again, and is right now the Uncanny Spider-Man, which, hot, but complicated to explain and really outside of the current issue. Nightcrawler's parentage has been consistently portrayed in the last 20 years, with Azazel even playing a part in Nightcrawler's resurrection, as Kurt sold his soul so he could stop. Oh my god, I'm doing it again. Do you see what I mean when I say Nightcrawler's family history is complicated? I'm going to skip ahead to this week with the release of X-Men Blue Origins #1, Lament in Blue. After a big issue at the Hellfire Gala, Xavier unleashed a mental attack and Mystique ended up kind of mentally broken. She starts wandering around looking for her baby. Nightcrawler tracks her down, and after a bit of back and forth and some gunplay, Kurt realizes she's not making sense, like she's half remembering things. This includes, while talking about Christian Wagner and Azazel, making reference to her wife. Nightcrawler uses his Hope Sword, yeah, it's complicated, it's magic, and it does shit, to shatter the remaining barriers in Mystique's mind. And finally, after nearly 50 years, Nightcrawler can fully get the story of his origins. But before I talk about what Mystique revealed, I do need to talk about Destiny. Not the concept, but the X-Men villain. Also known as Irene Adler, Destiny was introduced in the Days of Future Past arc. Yes, this is the same one where Nightcrawler's parentage was first hinted at, which is kind of important. Destiny was a blind mutant with the powers of precognition. She met Mystique around the turn of the 20th century. The pair would be lifelong friends until Destiny's death in 1989's Crash and Burn. I use friends in quotations because they queer. They hella queer. They were always meant to be lovers from the time of Destiny's first appearance in 1981. Chris Claremont has gone on record saying this many times. The comics contain very clear queer coding in their relationship, including them raising Rogue together as their foster daughter. However, because the Comic Code Authority forbid the depiction of queer characters, it was not until 2019 that their romantic relationship would be officially recognized, with a kiss shown between the pair in the History of Marvel Universe #2. Now, back to this week's comic. Man, I'm bouncing around so much. It's no wonder I don't do comic videos more. It's a lot to explain. With Mystique's memory blocks finally broken, she's able to reveal to Nightcrawler his true origins. There have been elements of truth in everything we've heard so far. Mystique was married to a noble named Christian Wagner. She had an affair with Azazel, and Nightcrawler was born in Wagner's estate before Mystique was chased out by angry townspeople. But Mystique didn't give birth to Nightcrawler. Destiny did. While Mystique lived as Christian Wagner's wife in order to take advantage of his wealth, Destiny and Mystique were also secretly married. However, they had an open relationship. While Mystique was married to Christian and had an affair with Azazel, she brought Destiny into the estate as a maid, and they maintained their relationship. Eventually, Destiny desired to have a child with Mystique. As Mystique reveals, her shapeshifting abilities alter her down to her DNA, so she was able to transform herself into Azazel to father Nightcrawler. In the biggest emotional punch, Mystique didn't abandon Kurt. She transformed into her natural form so Kurt could see her as herself as soon as he was born. Kurt and Mystique's appearances riled up the household staff because I think the people in this town are the same townspeople from Frankenstein, and they decided to kill the family. An exhausted Destiny couldn't escape and so told Mystique to flee with Kurt, but Mystique hides Nightcrawler and goes back to save Destiny. By the time she gets there, Destiny's already gone, and Azazel has kidnapped Kurt, giving him to his lover Margali Sarados. A heartbroken Mystique discovers the whole plan to have a child was a gambit by Destiny, based on a vision she had of Azazel conquering the world, and the only way to stop him was to make him believe he had a child, who would be his downfall. Destiny had seen the future of Nightcrawler, but knew the only way he could achieve the greatness he was meant for was if she and Mystique didn't raise him. So that's it for the comic origin explanations. That was a lot, folks. And I had to go back to read a lot of comics for this. Thankfully, I really like looking at Nightcrawler. So in just the few days since Lament in Blue was released, well, the discourse has been spicy. And by spicy, I mean people have either reacted like decent human beings and loved it, that's where I am, or just been kind of, shrug, it's another comic retcon. But then there's this pervasive and unfortunately very loud group who want to hide their queerphobia by pretending they actually give a shit about Azazel in the Draco story arc. So other than wondering, why the fuck do you care so much about a retcon to a pretty universally reviled story that itself was a retcon? The reason people like me have no problem with Lament in Blue's origin retcon is it's writing a long time wrong. Destiny was always supposed to be Nightcrawler's mother, with Mystique as the father. This is why Destiny was introduced in the same comic arc that Nightcrawler's parentage was put into question in the first place. If you think the Comic Code Authority had a problem with two women being in a romantic relationship, you can just imagine what they would have said about a character being genderqueer, but presenting most often as a woman, impregnating her female lover. It's why Nightcrawler wasn't revealed to be Mystique's son for nearly 15 years after the first hint, because they had been holding out for the original storyline. But eventually it seemed like it would never come to pass, so the writers just decided to make Mystique his mom. But once he had stopped writing the X-Men books, Chris Claremont never made a secret to the fans what his original intention was. So what's the side of the detractors of this retcon? Yeah, it's transphobia. Now, I would like to say just up front that I am a cis woman. So I can talk about Mystique's portrayal as a genderqueer character from my trans-supporting but still cis perspective. And I would actually really love to hear the opinion from anyone who is not cis in this discussion, because it's something that's actually been missing thus far, so please post your videos, post on Twitter, I want to know what you guys are thinking. While this comic does spend a lot of time on Nightcrawler's origins, it also spends quite a few pages addressing Mystique's gender identity. The terminology is up for debate because she never uses specific terms. What we do know is that Mystique has been referred to with she/her pronouns when in her non-shapeshifted form since the beginning of time, and she hasn't changed now. However, during a scene in which she reveals she fathered Nightcrawler, she says, "I have lived for years as sapiens male, years more as females. Do you know what I have observed? They're all as awful as each other." And then later says, "I am Raven Darkholm. Whatever else I am, or am not, whether it be for a lifetime or a single night, is for no one but me to say." Mystique could be non-binary or gender fluid, or possibly all of them. Personally, I think Mystique doesn't identify as anything because she's super old and was comfortable with her identity long before most of these terms came to prominence. So she's fine with just being Raven Darkholm. Also, it could be that Mystique sees gender as a baseline human issue, which I think is a fair reading of her comments. I think a big source of this transphobia, other than the blind terror at anything perceived as wokeness, is the sense of possessiveness cis fanboys have for Mystique. Since her introduction, she has been one of the biggest sex symbols at Marvel, a status that only increased when she was played by naked Rebecca Romaine and naked Jennifer Lawrence in the X-Men movies. These fans want to erase Mystique's genderqueer identity because being attracted to anyone who's not entirely cis sends them into gay panic. They are attracted to her, therefore she must conform to their idea as to what a woman is, which is someone who is assigned female at birth and has never been anything but. But for Mystique, a shapeshifter since her very first appearance, they want her very nature to just be an ability she uses against people, rather than who she is. So there's the transphobia, and there's also just homophobia. One Twitter critic was derisive about the artwork portraying Mystique and Destiny, stating the characters were made to look ugly, and it would have been much better in the 90s. Looking at the artwork of this comic, the characters are portrayed beautifully, but they're not portrayed with the male gaze. Well, not much male gaze. But the scenes of Mystique and Destiny together aren't exploitive. They're loving. In the 90s, it most likely would have been played for more titillation if they'd been allowed to portray a woman-loving woman relationship. And this is another part of the possessiveness. It's okay for Mystique and Destiny to be in love, as long as their love is for the sexual gratification of the male readers. The detractors who are trying to hide their hatred of anything not straight cis are complaining about the diminishing of Azazel within Nightcrawler's story, which is just the biggest bullshit I've ever heard. You all heard me talk about the Draco storyline in which he was introduced. I didn't even get into the garbage of people being crucified on the lawn of Xavier's school and Warring Worthington being the descendant of actual angels. I was reading X-Men comics at the time. I was in the fandom. It was terrible. Chuck Austen is widely regarded as one of the worst things to ever happen to X-Men comics. No one is actually standing Azazel. There's also the fact that Azazel has only been Nightcrawler's father since 2003. Nightcrawler had been around for nearly 30 years before Azazel was even conceived as a character. Complaining about Nightcrawler's origin being retconned is ridiculous, because his origin is probably tied with the Maximoff twins for the most retconned. I went on for just so many minutes about his origin, and that doesn't even get into all of the small changes that were made over the years. Margali found him next to his dead mother. Margali found him next to his dead father. He was thrown over a cliff by angry townspeople. He was thrown over a cliff by Mystique. Mystique dropped him by accident while fleeing. Mystique gave him directly to Margali Sarados. Azazel gave him directly to Margali Sarados. His father was a German count. His father was a German baron. His father was a demon. Why is he Catholic when he was raised by birth by a super problematic depiction of a Romani? And in all of these explanations, no one has ever bothered to explain where the name Kurt Wagner actually came from, since Christian Wagner didn't receive his name until it was established the German noble wasn't actually Kurt's father. You know, I've actually seen detractors say that Marvel has ruined a wholesome storyline with the retcon of Mystique and Destiny as Nightcrawler's parents. I would like to remind you that Azazel competes with Mephisto over the right to call himself Satan. He came to Earth specifically to seduce dozens of women and impregnate them so his children could sacrifice themselves in order to bring his demonic hordes out of hell and onto Earth. This is what we're considering wholesome, because it's cis and straight. Am I saying there's absolutely no good reason for someone to dislike this retcon? No, I'm not. But there are some extreme caveats. If someone under the trans umbrella were to bring up that Mystique is perpetuating the long line of anyone outside of the gender binary being reserved for characters who are not normal humans, that would be a valid criticism. It's a topic that has been brought up before, where trans characters are only allowed to exist if they're gussied up in sci-fi fantasy costume. Some examples are the Trill in Star Trek, Time Lords in Doctor Who, Gozer in Ghostbusters, Angels and Demons in Good Omens. I could go on, but that's a topic for another video by someone much more knowledgeable on this subject than me. This would be an argument that I would listen to because, yes, we absolutely need more trans characters who are more grounded in the everyday human experience. However, I have heard this argument from literally no one about Mystique. I only bring it up because I have heard it discussed in terms of some of the examples I have mentioned above. But I think the reason no one has brought up this potential argument is because the X-Men being metaphors for the queer experience is nothing new. At initial conception, the X-Men were metaphors for the civil rights movement of the 1960s, but by the time their popularity really took off in the 1980s, it was the start of the AIDS crisis. The queer metaphor always fit the X-Men so well. Mutants often come to terms with their nature at puberty and are often kicked out of their homes by not conforming to the natures of their families. There have been multiple storylines about curing mutants, an allegory for conversion therapy. The graphic novel God Love Man Kills introduced religious zealots who used the motto God hates mutants. Many mutants have preferred using their code names over their birth names, an allegory for dead naming. The legacy virus introduced in the 1990s was a direct allegory for AIDS, even having many of the same initial symptoms. And the reason why queer fans have always found the X-Men so comforting is that X-Men has always been about a found family of people coming together because of their outcast status. Mystique herself has said she shouldn't have to hide who she is, despite her ability to pass, because she's mutant and proud. We're just going to ignore the thing where Mystique is usually a terrorist. This is one of the reasons why fantastical allegory can be problematic. So I have read every single comic related to Nightcrawler's origin, and I reread them all to write this video. In terms of this new comic, I think there's only one criticism I personally hold against it. This is from me. I have literally seen no one else saying this. I think the explanation for what happened is incredibly overwritten. Mystique goes on for pages about how this is possible, including going on about how her ability to change her form includes changing her very DNA so that Azazel can be seen as Nightcrawler's biological father. There is even a page from a report by Krakoa's Quiet Council on Mystique, enumerating how her abilities work in exacting detail so no stone is left unturned. Reading this from my position as a writer, editor, media critic, and queer media commentator, I feel that writer Cy Spurrier wanted to make sure this story was absolutely bulletproof in terms of continuity. Somewhere at Marvel, they had a whiteboard where they wrote down each and every single one of Nightcrawler's backstories, and they figured out how to connect them all together by making them kind of true, but with this big missing piece that we've only just gotten. They also wrote down all of the questions that might have come up with this new retcon, and they were damn sure to put the answers into the comic. They could have yada yada'd some of them. The wall of text explaining how Mystique can change her DNA, yeah, this is a lot. It made the story a bit clunky at points. And I think that came from a place of fear, that Marvel knew they were going to get a lot of homophobic backlash, so they wanted to cover all their bases, something which they've never felt the need to do before. They certainly didn't put that much thought into changing Wanda and Pietro's parentage. Like, seriously, you guys retcon things all the time. You don't need to scramble so much to explain everything. But even with that one personal criticism from me, I think this was a great story. Not only was I always a fan of this backstory since I first heard about it being the original intent, I think this deepens the character of Mystique. Nightcrawler and Mystique have never had a close relationship, even after the many reveals about them. The knowledge that Mystique was the one person who wanted Kurt as her son without any agenda, and she was made to forget it and believe she hated him, is heartbreaking, and it brings a whole new layer to this character that's been around for decades. For those of you who are caping for Azazel, he's always been a glorified sperm donor, and this story doesn't really change that, because now he's a glorified DNA donor, which, when you're talking about mutant demons, I think that's the same diff. I cannot even fathom that people are upset that instead of being taken advantage of by an immortal demon while she was taking advantage of a German noble, Mystique instead had a loving relationship that spanned a century, that These two lived as wives and decided to bring a child into the world out of love. Mystique and Destiny are one of the greatest love stories in all of Marvel Comics. Theirs is a love so strong that when Destiny died, she left a note telling Mystique where to dump her ashes off the back of a cruise ship at a specific time and specific place. Because her precog ass knew the ashes would pick up in the wind and blow back in Mystique's face. And one of the most hardcore assassins in all of the Marvel Universe laughed at her true love getting the last word. And now we find out that one of the greatest heroes in all of Marvel Comics is a product of that love. There is no reason to prefer Kurt be the spawn of a literal Satan because of your bigotry. If that is your point of view, you've somehow missed the entire point of X-Men. Also, who doesn't want Nightcrawler to be Destiny's child? Comment down below with your thoughts on Nightcrawler's revised origins. If you like my videos, subscribe to my channel. I do videos about Buffy, Doctor Who, Marvel, Star Trek, Star Wars, and lots of other geeky things. You can check me out Thursday nights at 9:30 on Strange New Pod, a Star Trek podcast. If you want to support me, please visit my Patreon. You can also buy me a coffee or go to my Redbubble in TeePublic. You can find me on all those platforms, as well as most social media, as Emcee Frodis. So until next time, live long and may the Force be with you.